And welcome back to episode 3 with Dave. Dave, how are you? We are getting great feedback, great responses from our last 2 episodes. People are saying informative, educational, helping them with their struggle and also offering them hope in a world of madness.
Again, I'm humbled and I'm slightly embarrassed because I'm only sharing something that I think we should all know. And I was privileged enough that somebody shared it with me. So thank you, and I'm happy to share this. Again, folks, always do your due diligence, even when I'm speaking, because by doing your due diligence, it'll raise awareness with yourselves.
It's about asking questions, asking questions and getting answers to questions. The last 2 weeks were very important. The first week we sort of touched off on schools. Last week it was the employee, the employer, and then leadership. This week, what do you want to open up with this week?
I'd like to wind it back a little bit and talk about constitutions, just in broad sweeps, just to kind of give people a grounding on the fundamentals.
Okay, well then let's start on the fundamentals.
So I suppose when people think of a constitution, fundamentally, what is it? Most people think that the constitution restricts them in some particular way. It doesn't, okay? If you think that piece of pen and paper or ink restricts you, then I challenge you to think of any other book out there that holds you back in any particular way. It's the ideas within the book that move you in a specific direction. So constitution can be defined as, this is broad sweeps here, kind of like body of rules, customs or laws that people have agreed that, it appears to be a good way that we should conduct our society, that we should work together. Okay, so it's what's called primary legislation, okay, in legal lands. So when I'm speaking to you about constitution today, it's primary legislation. I'd like to speak to you today about the fact that there's actually, most people don't realize this, and it's just to share this idea with you, there's actually 5 constitutions operating on the island of Ireland right now. That's 5 constitutions. So a lot of people get quite confused when they think of this. When I talk about the 32 counties here, the 6 plus the 26. So when I'm speaking about this, I need to talk to you about the 1919 constitution, which nobody has ever heard of, which to me is very strange. I need to briefly speak to you about the 1922 Constitution, 1937 Constitution as well, which is what most people think that they're voting on, which is the Blue Book Constitution. You get an Easton's for about a fiver, I think. And also, more importantly, the original text draft of that version. The original text draft is the stronger version in law, even though it's not as strong as the 1919 Constitution, which I'm going to be referring to. And I'd also like to talk to you just briefly about the fact that there's an EU constitution as well. Okay, so far that's actually 5. I'm actually excluding kind of the Northern Ireland rules of the land up there, and that jurisdiction, if I can use that term. It's probably actually 6 when you think about it. There's a lot of different legalities and formalities that's taken place in this country. Okay, so this is just a primer really on constitutions and what they are. So again, this isn't the full body of knowledge on this. So I challenge everybody to ask themselves the question, why haven't they been given a copy of the Constitution? Surely it's the state's duty to inform everybody what the limitations on the state actually are. So in a fully functional democracy, most people would probably have a copy of their Constitution at home, be very familiar with it. Personally, I like to keep a copy of the Constitution on my dashboard for when I'm driving around, the Blue Book, that is. In the United States and different jurisdictions, the Constitution is very important, but not really so much here in Ireland. I'm trying to get people to realise that there's a good reason for that. There's a very good reason for that. They don't really want you thinking about it, okay? So who are they? Right? Fundamentally, people who would like to have a little bit more power over you than you'd like them to have. I don't really want you to think about this document that doesn't restrict you in any way, but actually, in fact, restricts government. So when I'm speaking to you about the Constitution today, I want you to be mindful that there's a lot of different constitutions, but there's really only one that supersedes them all, and that's the 1919 Constitution. And what you're going to discover why did I was speaking about this in a moment.
I'm a bit shocked when you mentioned that there's 5. History has taught me that we have one constitution. I think people need to be very aware of.
Yeah, absolutely. So I suppose what people don't realize is that there's what's called the Sovereign Constitution. And the Sovereign Constitution declared on the 21st of January 1919. This wasn't just something that came together the evening before. This is something that was being worked on for a number of years behind the scenes. Most people might be familiar with the Easter Rising, but I really want people just to think of the word there. Like, we're aware of the proclamations, so the Irish proclamations. There was a proclamation that the people were sovereign. It doesn't mention the word democracy in there whatsoever. If you go back and have a look at that document, it doesn't mention the word democracy in there once. It actually talks about sovereignty, a sovereign republic. Hold that idea in your mind for a moment. Okay, at that particular time, the Irish nation was under the yoke of the crown, and the head of the crown structure was the British sovereign. So in order to break free, and we can use that term, of the control of the sovereign, then you had to be on a par with the sovereign. Like, this is recognizing somebody else's authority, but also proclaiming your own. So that proclamation was a proclamation that all the people are sovereign. All the people have a right to all the assets of the state. All the people have a duty of care towards each other. At that moment in time, it was only a proclamation. On the 21st of January 1919, following the election in Ireland, the Sovereign Constitution was ratified. That Sovereign Constitution acknowledged the rising on the April 24th, 1916, as being the wish and will of the people of Ireland. This is very important to be mindful of. The reason you don't know about this document is that because this supersedes all other constitutions which came after it, because it recognized the sovereignty of the nation, it recognizes the sovereignty of the individual. It also flags the fact that the competence is not within the competence of any generation to surrender that sovereignty, which each generation holds in trust for the nation. Okay, I can't give it away for you, Joe. I wouldn't want you giving it away for me. There's a specific question there. The question of surrender of national independence may not be submitted to the electorate. Okay, and it acknowledges the following. This is just going to wrap this up in a bow for people. All authority in Ireland, legislative, executive, and judicial, I'm reading from the Constitution here, and all powers of government are derived solely under God from the people of Ireland. These powers are inherent in the people alone by virtue of their sovereignty. They must be exercised in accordance with the principles of liberty, equality, and justice for all. And here's the kicker. Any legislation not in accordance with these principles is hereby declared to be null and void. There you go.
Explain that to us.
So I don't know if you recall previously, Joe, I said my rights end where yours begin. That was a simplistic way of saying it. If something is not in consonance with protecting your rights as an individual, okay, to live your life as, once you're not harming anybody else, then it goes against the principles of the first Constitution. That goes against the principles of the 1919 Constitution. So the state does not have the authority in Ireland. Back to this point of we don't have a king or a queen or an emperor of Ireland. So the landmass where everybody is residing right now, all the assets belong to the people. Everything is held in trust for the people. We're a society of people who are here to assist each other and presumably to elevate each other and empower each other and support each other, which most normal people want to do. That means that fundamentally, if the state is trying to restrict your activities, your right to travel, your right to see your family, that they're trying to tell you what you should be teaching in school, you have the right to invoke the 1919 Constitution. That's your God-given right. So, the state is there to hold things in trust for the people. It's not to direct the people as to the wishes of the state. And that was the first article in that 1919 Constitution. Try and cast your mind back. We were an oppressed people. We were a people who have just come out of, at the time, I'm just giving a matter of fact here, we come out of what some people call a famine, other people might call a genocide around potatoes. We had come out of a very dark period, and we've tried to stand on our own 2 feet and say, look, we're an honourable nation. We want to be respected in the world. We're trying to take our rightful place. We're trying to be an exemplar for how we should treat our people and our neighbours. And if you go back to all that documentation that was released at that time, that's exactly what we were saying. It sent a message to the 3 nations of the world. We also try to respect our neighbours while actually declaring our own sovereignty. What does all that mean? That means that fundamentally the people are the highest authority under the Creator, not the other way around, Joe. It's the people who give the state the right to exist, as opposed to the state giving the people the right to exist.
Now, sometimes I feel that has flipped. Looking out today, in the very beginning of this, when COVID was kicking in, there was a lot of compassion and empathy and community. We're really sort of connecting and taking time for ourselves. But in this chaos that's after coming along, there's more rules and regulations, and we're going down a road where our hands are even being tied even more by state. And that's why I think this is so important again, now than ever before. Sovereignty. My sovereignty is okay and yours is. But when is it when my sovereignty rubs up against yours and affects your rights, or vice versa?
Yeah, absolutely. I do understand the point, okay? And again, I'm going to ask you to kind of cast your mind back a little bit, because at the time, Joe, and I'm just speaking about this from a historical perspective, at the time of the 1919 Constitution, there were actually sovereign Dáil Éireann courts taking place, okay, where the actual sovereign Irish people could go as individuals and get issues rectified between themselves, okay, without using the British legal system. So there was actually a parallel legal system that was taking place, and they were called the sovereign Dáil Éireann courts. And a lot of those principles were actually based on Brehon law. There were mechanisms that people could actually defend each other and resolve issues. Some of these principles actually overlapped with custodianship of the land. But one of the rubrics that they actually said was it going to cause harm to the land for the next generation? My rights end where yours begin. Right? So it's not just me and Joe having a discussion about where this construction goes in. It's okay, Joe wants to build it, but what about the next generation? See how this works. Get you to think things with the macro and take a step back for yourself.
Yeah, and it's sort of analysing then, if you look at a very larger scale, where corporate brown envelopes were passed in years gone, where large developments were built in certain areas, destroyed other areas, especially within Dublin, North and West Dublin.
Yes, and I'm delighted you brought that up, Joe, because most people don't know to this day how to deal with corporations that appear to be just fully driven by the profit motive. The solution, the actual solution, is a very elegant one, and it's actually one of the principles of the 1919 Constitution and some of the documentation that's spun out from that, in that all licenses are only issued for 1 year, and they have to be renewed by the people. So in order for a corporation to actually exist and operate in the jurisdiction, they have to be seen on the balance of probabilities, on the balance of reflection that's been working in the people's interest. So if the corporation somehow were negligent in their duties towards the broader society, the people could actually rescind that license. So again, right, you have the idea of the people being able to have final say over the non-living dead entities. So nowadays, even if you break up down the word corporation, right, corpse, oration, so speaking, right, so literally in legal land, the dead speak, oration. So, that's how people give power to all these things. They actually think that these entities have power over their lives, when actually in the sovereign constitution it was recognized that corporations need to be controlled by the people to make sure they're going to stay on a path that's fair and equitable towards everybody in society. So that's a very interesting aspect of the 1919 Constitution that is still in play to this day. And people have a right to ask for those licenses. So it's just an interesting point just to flag there for your listeners.
Yeah, definitely.
Fundamentally, I suppose, is that the principle, the overarching principle is this: the state does not impinge on the rights of the individual. For anybody who's I'm going to just use the term, Joe, right? Because I think it's important to flag the people here, because maybe they might be in mortgage trouble, or they might have issues around their primary dwelling where they live. So the 1919 Constitution said that the land of Ireland belongs to the people of Ireland and to them alone. So I really want people to reflect on that. Okay, if you don't own the land, who does, right? So the land of Ireland, cannot be sold off. If somebody said to you that you're evicted or something like that, and this is an important point, but we'll cover it again. Let them take the bricks, right? But you own the land, okay? And nobody's going to take a house brick by brick, folks. So there's no value in it, okay? So you kind of have the stalemate situation. But again, I'm just trying to show you how this material can be used in multiple ways.
I think we'll talk about that at another time, because people have tried to use something like this as well and failed, and they have been evicted. So we'll go into that in more detail at a later date.
Okay, I'm going to go back to the 1919 Constitution for a second. I would recommend people look at this. I'm sure you'll be uploading this somewhere, Joe, but if people wanted to look at it, can you plug a website here, I think?
Plug the website and then give us a link, and we'll put the link in the show notes then as well, so people can directly click on that link. Because what I want from people to do as well is, I want to plant some seeds for people, and I want them to go and do research. So we'll give people links occasionally for them to have a look at, do the research, and come to their own conclusions on this journey as well.
That I highly recommend if people are interested in the history and the lineage of all this material. It's billymaguire.com. If they go onto that website, they're going to see that there's a plethora of materials there. It's substance over style. So I would recommend people go to the link that says constitutions and have a look at everything I'm saying, particularly look at the 1919 Constitution and realize that can never be usurped. And that recognizes the authority of the people. Now, they subsequently tried a little bit, but we're back to the original document that right can never be taken away from the people by virtue of their sovereignty. Okay, so that was established. I really want everybody to understand this. That was established on the legal record. Okay, I'm not talking about like 32 County Ireland record. I'm talking about, if I can use the term, the British legal system. The Irish First Dáil registered. So that is forevermore today on the record in the British legal system on the island of Ireland. Whether they want to admit it or not, that's just how it is. And it's very important that people realize this. This isn't just a bunch of yahoos that got together and said, this is going to be our constitution. This was carefully thought out, carefully planned, and carefully considered. So it's very important that people give this document the gravity that it deserves and the respect that it deserves. It's really easy to dismiss something when you don't understand it. But I would really encourage all the listeners to engage with this, look at the document, and look at where it was coming from and what the intention of that document was. And also, with respect, go back and read the 1916 proclamation and read it from the perspective of there's an oppressed nation, and look at the rights it was trying to give everybody, no matter what their religious belief was or no matter what their familial status was. And look at how elegant that document was. Like to this day, it's still an incredible document. Once you separate how you've been taught to think about it, you've been taught to think about that as being some rebel rousers document, okay? You need to look at that as an elegant expression of a nation, of where it wanted to go, to be a service to the people. And when you change that perspective, everything starts to fall into gear for you. So that 1919 Constitution is critical. It supersedes everything else. But here's the key thing, okay? Because that document declared that the people were sovereign, King George V at the time, I'm just talking for a matter of history here, was not happy with that document because that declared that the people were sovereign. And being sovereign, you are over everything. So I'm not even going to do a deep dive into this today, but suffice to say that the Dáil Éireann that declared themselves sovereign and the people sovereign was declared an illegal assembly. Now, I'm really giving a condensed version here. So King George V did not like that document, didn't like the uppity Irish doing this. They were our neighbours, no issue with them whatsoever. And just speaking about this from a historical perspective, so he declared Dáil Éireann an illegal assembly. Be mindful of this. If Dáil Éireann was declared an illegal assembly, who did King George V and the UK government come to an agreement with if they were illegal? How could they be declared illegal and then be given the optics of legality at a later date? Okay, I'm now talking about the 1922 Free State Constitution here, Sarah Stad Éireann. So there was obviously a stretch between 1919 and 1922, which is the War of Independence. We're going to have another expert on, I'm sure, another day to talk all about the history of this, Joe. But I'm just talking about the constitutions here. That 1922 Free State, Saoirstad Éireann Constitution, set up the Oireachtas with King George V, his heirs and successors, as the Oireachtas. So you need to be mindful about this. So the Oireachtas is why you have a Oireachtas report. It's not Dáil Éireann. So, like this is why all the emails are at theoireachtas.ie. Okay? So King George V made Dáil Éireann the legal assembly. The Free State Constitution, Free State states imposed on the people under threat of war, am I that? Most people think that there was a, shall we say, treaty. I would challenge anybody to look at what they think is a treaty. You're going to see that it was proposed articles of agreement. Now, let me explode this out for a second. A treaty is an agreement between two sovereign nations. And for a principle in law, the treaty needs to be signed in both sovereign jurisdictions to be an international treaty. So you've got two sovereign entities recognizing each other and recognizing each other's position. So Arab-Israeli treaties and stuff like that. They have agreements between sovereign nations. But if one of those nations declared their neighbours representing body in the legal assembly, well, how can it be a treaty? How can it be a treaty, okay? So the Crown of England declared the Irish Parliament, the 1919 Parliament and the legal assembly, it imposed a representative body on the Irish people and treated effectively with itself through kind of a sleight of hand trick, which we'll get onto in another session. But here's how you know the whole thing is not fundamentally fraudulent, but it's a nonsense. The Irish delegation, plenipotentiaries they call, right, or plenipotentiaries, so people who go over to plead a case, essentially, they went over. One of the members of the party didn't like what was being proposed and refused to put their signature to the proposed articles of agreement. And what actually happened was that, like when you sign for a meal, Joe, with your credit card?
Yes.
Right? Well, back in the day before credit cards, you would have had to sign your name on a piece of paper for your meal card. So one of the Irish delegation didn't like what was happening with the proposed articles of agreement and refused to sign. And you can look at this. Everybody can look at this. Here's the nonsense of it. They actually cut out his signature from the dining card and attached it to the proposed articles of agreement to try and give this some kind of validity that the Irish delegation had agreed to it. And it gets worse. Not only did they cut somebody's signature out from a dinner card and stick it onto the proposed articles of agreement, they then got a pen and scratched out the word proposed and turned it into articles of agreement after the Irish left. So the whole thing is a nonsense.
I have seen that document as well. And when you look at the document, you can actually see the signature where there is the square around it. Where's the original document?
Oh, that's a good question. There's a lot of originals missing now at the moment, to be perfectly honest. I don't actually know. I don't know. I do know that document is sort of one of many that just doesn't add up. Just doesn't add up when you do a bit of a deep dive into it. Can I just point out one other thing very quickly, if I may? That document was signed under duress. The Irish are told, right, that there's the threat. This is commonly known, immediate and terrible war if they refuse to sign. So you've got a group of people sent over from Ireland to the UK to sign the document under duress, then said, look, immediate and terrible war if you don't sign this. One of them doesn't sign it. The mail card gets cut out. Then they scratch out proposed articles of agreement. But here's the kicker. Go back to the 1919 Constitution. It's not within the competence of anybody to sign away your sovereignty. Even though something was signed, that is an impossibility because of the 1919 Constitution. So that's your first major conceptual hurdle that you need to get over right there, right? How did that person have the authority to undermine what a nation of millions had agreed?
Yeah, put together in the 19 and then suddenly that it's trying to be altered. As you said in the beginning there, nothing can supersede that. Question, who was the guy that refused to sign?
Eamon O'Duggan. Yeah, no, it's a fascinating, and also, as I said to you about the proposed articles of agreement, and then somebody just getting the pen and scratching out the word
skullduggery,
proposed,
skullduggery, so as we like to say, skullduggery.
There's certainly a skullduggery afoot, It's not the best way to get off to international relations with your neighbours. I'll put it that way.
For a country.
No, it isn't. There's a great phrase, the fish rots from the head. And I think this is a great example of it. It's actually rotten from the top down. Something was afoot at that moment of time.
And what's coming from me is start as you mean to finish. And maybe things are finishing. The end is near.
Yeah, but again, we are back to the 1919 Constitution, and it's a do not pass go, do not collect 200 situation, if you remember the Monopoly board, And this all would still have to go back. This would all still have to go back and be considered in Dáil Éireann, or what was construed to be Dáil Éireann, which was really the Oireachtas at the time. There was two Dáil Éireanns at that time: the sovereign government, and then there was the provisional Dáil Éireann, as established under the Crown.
Just repeat that again. To the jigsaw.
Yes, it is, and it is something that they don't want you even thinking about. The Irish people gave themselves a sovereign republic. Self-determination is the name of the game, folks. So we said, we are on a par with the Crown of England. We're sovereign because they're sovereign too. And everybody wants to be a subject under the Crown. That's okay with them. It's not great for them, but that's their decision, right? But we're a sovereign republic, and we're on a par with the UK sovereign, right? So we can have friendly international relations with that individual and that construct. The UK sovereign, King George V, didn't like that idea, and he made Dáil Éireann an illegal assembly. So King George V made Dáil Éireann an illegal assembly. However, the Irish did not make it an illegal assembly. So, much like a train track, they were both headed in the same direction. So you have the sovereign Dáil Éireann, established by the wish and will of all the people, which can never be undone, and you have the corporate Government of Ireland Act, Oireachtas, which was established and ratified. So these two bodies were running in parallel to each other. And I can prove this because if people look at De Valera's Constitution and ours, written by Brian Farrell, if you remember Brian Farrell off Today Tonight many years ago, smart man, he acknowledges same in his book. So it's not me saying this, it's Professor Brian Farrell.
Yeah.
So just want to leave that there, that idea. People can do their due diligence about this, and I can probably find an image for that, Joe, as well, okay?
King George refused it, didn't recognise it, okay? So then we have Dáil Éireann today. Is that the same one that he did not recognise, or is that a different one?
Okay, so if I said to you something's illegal, Joe, how could you have a legal contract with something that's illegal? Dáil Éireann was declared an illegal assembly by King George V. He never undeclared it an illegal assembly. So what King George V did was he set up legislature called the Oireachtas, which consists of the King George V, his heirs and successors, and also the Oireachtas, which is the Oireachtas that we have today. That same construct is still in place. If people hear the word Dáil Éireann, they need to be mindful that it is not sovereign Dáil Éireann, it's the corporatized, and I'm going to use the word, pardon my language here, the bastardized Dáil Éireann. To be a member of Dáil Éireann, by the Irish people standards, you absolutely must have a 32 county mandate. Okay, that was what was established in that 1919 Constitution. It's so important that people always go back to that, because if you don't go back to that, you're going to lose your way. The analogy I use with people is that this stuff is like the babushka dolls. It's one inside of another, inside of another, inside of another. And this stuff is meant to confuse you. The devil is in the detail, but you need to know where to look. 1922, Free State, King George V, his heirs and successors at the top, at the apex. Then most people, there's a bit of a blur with most people's lives, and then they kind of go, okay, between 22 and 37, some weird stuff happened in Ireland, and there was a bit of dissension, but essentially De Valera came all right in the end, and he gave us a plebiscite, gave us a constitution that he worked on, I might add. And I'll get into De Valera another day, because he's the divisive person in Irish politics. But really what I want people to realise is the Blue Book constitution that that you can buy in Easton's isn't really a constitution, even though it says it's a constitution on the outside. It was put to the people as a plebiscite. So if I said to you, Joe, you're a bit of a plebeian, okay? Well, no disrespect to you, right? I'm just trying to get people to realize what this means. To the plebeians, we're just like, the commoners of the day, okay? Right? So you're, the people, right? But, not the sovereign people. So there was a vote that was put out, this passed. So approximately 2/3 of the country went for it. That's grand, okay? But what people need to realize is that was essentially an offer from the Oireachtas construct, still under the Crown, to say, here are your new and improved. So they just rebranded. The analogy I use with people is, do you remember Pat Grace's Kentucky Fried Chicken back in the day? Okay, right. So one day it was Pat Grace's Kentucky Fried Chicken. Then it became Kentucky Fried Chicken. And then it became KFC. So those three brands, right?
No.
On any of those days, Joe, did they stop serving chicken? No. So all they did was rebrand. Some of the corporate documentation might have changed. They might have changed the logo a little bit, but it's still the same business entity. Corporation. The dead are speaking to us. Corpse oration. So apparently the dead can speak in legal land. So when you are looking at the Blue Book Constitution, you need to realise that it is an offer of a contract from a corporation established by King George V in 1922. It's your new employee rights, basically. It's your employee handbook. So when people are looking at this, you can look at it as an employee, or you can pay attention to what's in the document and read it judiciously. And if you read it judiciously, you'll see that it still acknowledges the people's sovereignty. So I think De Valera, in a sense, among other people who worked in this, walked a very fine line, but if you pay attention, you can still find the truth in this document. But it takes a little bit of skill and practice, and hopefully that's what we're going to get on to.
Let me clarify. The Oireachtas, was set up by King George as an agreement after the Civil War to turn Ireland into a free state. But the Oireachtas was still part of the British Empire. Are we saying then
absolutely
that still stands today?
Yes.
Okay.
We are saying that. That's precisely what we're saying. And that might be a slightly difficult pill for people to swallow here, but just accept it.
No,
just accept it. It's
this
okay,
is history.
right? Just accept it. Don't get angry
just,
about it. Like, it's just your history.
Again, it's just
this is history,
leaving that with people and let them settle with it. I think that's the important thing. For the listeners, start asking yourself some questions and what sort of answers you would like to those questions for the future. That's it. For our future generations.
Absolutely. And again, we'll try and unpack this for people in a way that everybody can get their head around. Just to be mindful about this Blue Book Constitution. When you're looking at this Blue Book Constitution, like businesses and corporations have charters, right? And businesses have constitutions, which is the overriding set of principles for the entity. Most people are going to go, that's crazy. But here's the thing. When you start looking at the documentation around that period, you will see that Britain's World War I debt was actually put down on Ireland's government's shoulders. So the Free State, the Irish Free State, this is just being matter of fact here, folks, okay? So the Irish Free State The debt of Great Britain was actually put down on the Irish people.
And the pensions.
So that's why that corporation was established, folks. And the pensions. Yeah, absolutely. We're still paying this debt, Joe. The debt for the Napoleonic Wars, I think, the Napoleonic Wars, I think was only paid off about 30 years ago in the UK. But the citizens, if it can, subjects, actually, correction. We are still paying the interest on World War I debts in this
What's
country.
it labelled as? I
don't know how people feel about that. I don't think that's right.
The label of this debt?
Well, I can tell you the mechanism. Yeah. The mechanism was what's called the Consolidated Funds Act from the Irish statute book for themselves.
Follow the money. One of the other things as well, which I just want to touch off while we're talking about this, I've been told before you had the Constitution, and then originally it was that they had to sign the document which was allegiance to King George. And then in 1937, that was removed. Am I wrong there, or?
You're not wrong. Here's the devil is in the detail. So remember, the Oireachtas consist of King George V, his heirs and successors. So, Joe, do you have to take a note to your wife every day that you're married to her and you're going to love and cherish her?
No.
Yeah? No. You do have to take a note every day, do you?
She's listening. Yes, love. Yes, I do.
No, okay. Well, you took it once, did you? Took it once and you meant it, okay. And that established that agreement, that understanding, that duty of care, that structure. It's the exact same principle. That oath only had to be taken once by the people who stepped into that legislative realm called the Oireachtas. Anybody who came subsequently is bound by the rules of the Oireachtas. So there's an interesting point. My next question will be, who or what is their oath of allegiance to?
Again, what are the rules of the Oireachtas?
I think that would be a very interesting question to ask. I do want to point out one thing to you, if I can, just sort of backtrack and move forwards and backwards here, that the Bunreacht na Éireann, the Constitution of Ireland, the Blue Book that you know, that is the overarching principles of that legal body that was imposed on the Irish people. So there's like this duality. There's a duality in there. If you know how to interpret it, it protects the people's rights. And that's the sovereign Irish people. Equally, it limits the activities of the government. So there's kind of a stalemate in here, which is why when it suits the government that they're always pushing to change the Constitution, but other times they just totally ignore it. This probably explains to some people why we don't get to vote on certain things which are very important and pressing, such as ensuring that everybody's got the dignity of a home. I think most people would agree with. Can that not be enforced in the Constitution, inside the Constitution? Apparently not. But now we have to start encroaching with people's rights and lives by changing this document. So that's why this Constitution is so important. It provides a stalemate, a balance of power. So I just want to give credibility to where it is. The 1919 Constitution is incredibly important, as is the Blue Book. But even more important again, but not as important as the 1919 Constitution, is the original text draft.
You said there that when the Oireachtas was set up, that it was the heirs of King George. Who are they today?
The heirs of King George V, his heirs and successors. Well, there's a lovely lady called Elizabeth, who's over in Windsor at the moment, who is the heir of King George V. And maybe people don't want to believe me, but I imagine you'd agree with the statement, Joe, that lady is incredibly well versed in international diplomacy, etiquette, and procedures. And she'd be very precise and very highly educated as head of state.
Groomed from an early age.
Okay, the correct protocols. I think it might fascinate people to know that when Michael D. Higgins went over to Windsor Castle, if people actually listened to the speech that took place, the welcome speech from Michael D. Higgins as head of state, when they say head of state, it's actually what's called a suzerainty. Okay, that's the legal term for them, what Ireland actually is, folks. Okay, and you haven't heard that word before. It's a great word, a suzerainty. So when Michael D. Higgins went over to Windsor Castle as head of the 26 county corporation established under King George V, he was coming back as the CEO to meet his ultimate boss. Now, this is the reality of it, folks. And how do you know this is exactly what happened? Because there was only one state mentioned by Queen Elizabeth when she welcomed President Michael D. Higgins over, and that was the Irish Free State. She did not welcome the man over.
Yes, I watched that speech, and you can catch it online as well. And it's where she actually says the words Free State. And before I knew all this, or learning this, kind of questions is why she called us a free state? Why didn't she call us a republic? When that happened, it hit me, that's odd. Words have power. Words have power.
See, they're not lying, Joe. See, they're not actually lying. It's just people aren't paying attention. We've been given smoke and mirrors, a bait and switch, and people are trustworthy. And that's good that people are trustworthy, but it's trust but verify is the key thing here. And I'm going to give you very quick examples right from the Blue Book Constitution. If people are doubting me and they go, that's crazy, there's no way this man is telling the truth. The very first page, really, if there's any serious text on, which is I, Bunrock na Heron, you're going to see there's some text. Now, and the key thing here is for people to realise this and go back and do their due diligence. Joe, if I omitted to tell you something, it doesn't mean that you shouldn't have been informed. It just means that I forgot to tell you. It doesn't mean that it wasn't important. It also doesn't mean that it isn't critical that you know, but I omitted to tell Joe that. It just means that I haven't included it at this moment in time. Also, when I'm just giving you a segue here for what I'm about to read out. When I'm in transition, Joe, it's a bit like the USC charges. If you remember, they were only temporary. Okay, if you remember those. So things can be temporary for a long period of time. So everything's only temporary anyway. We're only here for a temporary bit of time. So if something is transitory, they can continue to be in transition. It doesn't mean that it's completed. So I'm now about to read from Bunrock na Heron on the page called I. The text of this constitution is the copy of the text enrolled on the 13th of November. This is my copy here, 2019, pursuant to Article 25.5.2, except the transitory provisions, Articles 34A and 51 to 64, are omitted as required by their terms, and the Irish text has been altered so as to make it to conform to modern standardised Irish. Let me unpack that for you. Before you even read the Constitution, it's telling you that there's transitory provisions in it, and they've been omitted. And you're scratching your head going, okay? You're going, what's this all about? So if you try and go back to what the transitory provisions are, you will go back to Sir Stat na Heron. Before you even read the first page of the Irish Constitution properly, it's bringing you directly back to the Free State Constitution. And this is a constitution. This is like an adjunct. This is like a bolt-on to it. Okay? A direct connection with the past. Yeah. You read Article 34.34A, which is hard to find, by the way, but it's about money bills, and 51 to 64 in the Free State Constitution. You will see that there's a direct link between Blue Book Bunrock na Heron and Sir Stat Éireann. And it's there in black and white. If you want to deny your own eyes, I can't help you, folks. But it's there in black and white, and it's telling you that this, has been omitted as required by their own terms. Doesn't mean that it's not part of the Constitution. It just means that the two documents can never join up by their own terms. Doesn't mean that it's not part of. It means it's connected to. Where they make the budget in legal land is Dáil Éireann. So you'll see that around the time of the budget, it's always the Dáil Éireann budget. It's not the Oireachtas budget. So just be mindful about that, folks. The devil is in the detail, right? And that's sometimes why they like to call themselves TDs. So they wear this duality, so they think they can get away with it.
So Leinster House, then, what is Leinster House? It's owned to this day, you're saying?
Leinster House is owned by the Duke of Leinster, Joe.
and there's a rent paid
from the Royal Dublin Society
to him.
Joe.
Obviously, there's a yearly rent paid to him.
Yeah.
For this building. So then I'm going to ask this question then. So if that's the case, is Leinster House classed as Incorporation British soil like the British Embassy?
That is my understanding of it at this moment in time, Joe.
Please.
To the best of my knowledge, that's who currently owns Leinster House. And I can drag that out for you somewhere. What if I told you that the houses is a Oireachtas or a registered company, that you can actually see their credit report on Dun & Bradstreet? Is it British soil? Claimed dominion over it.
Have I missed something?
Is there flags flying directly above? Stop and think about this for a second, right? So again, the key point here is, okay, if Dáil Éireann was declared an illegal assembly, who is sitting, right, in the Oireachtas to this day? And so if people think this is too far-fetched, okay, that this is just David making this up, all right, I would challenge them to look at an excerpt from the book Money for Ireland, which proves that the Oireachtas is not the direct descendant of Sovereign Dáil Éireann. And that was a Supreme Court case in the United States. A Professor Francis Carroll, Milwaukee University. There was a number of bonds that were issued internationally. People wanted to support Ireland. And there were sovereign bonds that was issued to help liberate Ireland effectively. Free State essentially tried to draw down those bonds. And there was a legal argument that took place. Determination was made in another nation, the United States, which proves that the Oireachtas is not the direct descendant of Sovereign Dáil Éireann. And that was a Supreme Court case in the United States. A Professor Francis Carroll, I think it's Milwaukee University, but I'll pull up details for people maybe at the end. There was a number of bonds that were issued internationally. People wanted to support Ireland. And there were sovereign bonds that was issued. Was actually kind of a freak state, appointed some judges to award themselves the bonds and claimed that they were the rightful heirs. So, a lot of this stuff has gone back to follow the money and corruption. But again, this is something I can share with your listenership. There's
a lot there, even just there. There's a lot of questions coming up. So anyway,
I suppose key things here is doing a flag this. All right, so there's a lot of nuggets.
This is education, history, and fiction.
Okay. So let's just park this, right? And let's take this Blue Book Constitution of Ireland as being the absolute gospel truth of a fully functioning society, right? This document then, therefore, is very important that everybody understands what it is, and they should be fully informed about it and be aware of how to utilize it. I think that's a fair comment. So we have this Blue Book Constitution of Ireland. Okay, right? So of in itself is another interesting legal word, but I won't go into that. So that Blue Book Constitution there is not the superior version of that document, okay? That Blue Book Constitution is a watered-down constitution. It is not the true Irish Constitution. Now, what does David mean by this? In case of a divergence between English and Irish, because Irish was the native mother tongue, okay? In the case of a divergence between English and Irish, the Irish text reigns supreme. Now, why is this important? Because the original text draft of this was in Irish, and the translation that people are being given in the Blue Book version is not, I'm going to say this again, is not the true Constitution. Every time the Referendum Commission is asking you to vote on a question, they are being deceptive in the words that they are asking you to make a decision on. They are giving you the watered-down Constitution, which does not enshrine and protect your rights.
I'm a lover of history.
Just look at it and ask yourself, why didn't you know? Why didn't you know?
what's flagging with me is after today is the Oireachtas. I will never look at it in the same way as I do today. Dave, thanks for coming on. Part of our history that we are not going to let slip away. Until next week, thank you for listening. Take care and God bless.